טיל באוויר, טיל באוויר.
Since its inception, Israel has faced difficult political and military challenges. It defines the operational space in which Israeli Defense Forces exists, the nature of development of its armed forces, and of individual weapon systems it uses. The key objective and permanent factors include Israel's geography, with the 470-kilometer-long country being no more than 135 kilometers wide. Hostile environment, including unresolved territorial disputes with neighbors and the Palestinian problem, and close proximity to borders of major cities and critical infrastructure. At the same time, Israel did not treat its adversary's ability to use rockets as a priority for a long time. Therefore, establishing a comprehensive anti-ballistic missile system was not among its priorities either. The situation changed after the 1991 Gulf War, when Iraq struck Israeli cities using improved Soviet R-17 NATO classification SS-1B Scud-B ballistic missiles. At the time, US Patriot PAC-2 anti-ballistic missile systems were used to protect Israeli cities. However, they demonstrated their ineffectiveness. Therefore, a decision was made to push the development of the Arrow and Arrow 2 anti-ballistic missile system jointly with the United States, with the first systems deployed in March of 2000. The Arrow 2 system was intended to defeat attacks using ballistic missiles with ranges up to 3,000 kilometers. However, Hezbollah and Hamas were expanding their use of short-range rocket artillery. The Second Lebanon War of 2006 showed Israel to be vulnerable against such weapons. In that conflict, Hezbollah used a wide range of 107mm, 102mm, 220mm, 240mm, and 302mm rockets of Soviet, Chinese, Syrian, and Iranian manufacture with ranges between 6 and 210 kilometers, such as the Fajr 3, Zelzalen, Nazit, and others. Between July 13th and August 13th, Israel was the target of 4,228 rockets, which caused 53 civilian fatalities, 250 wounded, and 2,000 cases of light injuries, in addition to considerable damage to infrastructure and housing. Following this war, Israel's leaders decided it was necessary to establish a tactical anti-ballistic missile system, and in February of 2007, the decision to develop Iron Dome was made, with Rafael Advanced Defense Systems already working on it at that time. Its deployment in Israel began in 2011. According to Rafael data, Iron Dome is a dual-purpose system, intercepting rockets, shells, and mortar bombs, counter-rocket, artillery, and mortar, or CRAM, and also very short-range air defense, or VSHORAD. Iron Dome's main mission, according to a Rafael brochure, is protecting civilians in cities, strategic facilities and infrastructure, and also reducing collateral damage. It may also be used to protect troop convoys and ships. The system can operate around the clock, in any weather and climate. Iron Dome is intended to rapidly detect, identify, and intercept asymmetrical means of attack, such as short-range rockets from 4 through 70 kilometers, mortar bombs, and artillery shells. Moreover, when used as a surface-to-air missile, Iron Dome can engage aerial targets, including aircraft, helicopters, unmanned aircraft systems, and precision-guided munitions. Iron Dome includes the following components: an ELM 2084 truck-mounted multi-role radar, a fire control system, and 3 truck-towed launchers, each with 20 Tamir interceptor rockets. A single system is capable of protecting an area of 150 square kilometers. The Tamir missile is equipped with a homing sensor under a metallic ballistic cone to protect it against high temperatures. The cone is ejected several seconds prior to the intercept using the proximity-fused warhead. Tests of the naval version of Iron Dome concluded in November 2017. There are plans to install it on Sarar 5 corvettes and to protect drilling platforms in coastal areas. One of Iron Dome's specifics is its ability to identify priority targets and to intercept only those which pose a threat to protected sites. This ability is provided by the high-tech fire control system integrated with the ELM-2084 radar. If the incoming projectile is predicted to fall in uninhabited areas, launch commands are not issued in order to reduce operational expenses, since each intercept costs several tens of thousands of dollars. Intercepts are carried out by Tamir rockets, which detonate in close proximity to the intercepted objects. The intercept takes place at the peak of target trajectory to reduce contamination should the warhead carry chemical or biological agents. The United States have been active in financing the development, production, and servicing of Iron Dome since 2011. The program's overall cost has been estimated at approximately $4.5 billion, with the U.S. contribution being over $1.5 billion. The U.S. budget for 2018 includes $92 million to finance Iron Dome. U.S. participation in Iron Dome is motivated by the need to support ABM development by its main ally in the region and creating a technological base for own future ABM systems. The main U.S. Iron Dome partner has been Raytheon, with some 55% of its components that are financed by the U.S. are made by U.S. contractors, chiefly Raytheon. Each Iron Dome battery costs about $50 million, while each Tamir rocket is estimated at $20,000 to $100,000. Operating costs is difficult to estimate. Iron Dome is being supplied to Canada, Azerbaijan, India, and several other countries. The Czech Republic will receive them in the near future. The total volume of sales has reached $2 billion. Israel declared its intent to export the system many times. Interested parties have included South Korea, Singapore, Saudi Arabia, and the United States, which have voiced interest in buying the system to protect its own bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. Iron Dome effectiveness is subject of considerable debate among the expert community. Rafael has touted the system as highly effective, with Israel's Ministry of Defense supporting that assessment. Effectiveness assessments are mainly based on the Second Lebanon War and 2 IDF operations in Gaza, being Pillar of Cloud in 2012 and Protective Edge in 2014. Thus, according to the IDF, in 8 days of Pillar of Cloud, Hamas launched 1,506 rockets at Israel, of which 421 were intercepted, 875 fell in unpopulated areas, and 58 in populated areas. 6 were killed, and 240 were wounded. The IDF claims Iron Dome effectiveness was 84%. However, this data is doubted by US and Israeli experts. First of all, given IDF information on launched and intercepted rockets, the system effectiveness should be about 87.9%. The operational cost of Iron Dome, including Tamir interceptor rockets, was $25 through $30 million. Secondly, according to Israeli Police Southern District data, some 109 rockets fell in populated areas, not 58. There is also no data on the reasons most of the rockets launched against Israel missed. This is likely due to the low quality of rockets used by Palestinians. IDF claims that during Protective Edge, Palestinians launched 4,500 rockets, of which 692 were intercepted during 50 days. No additional data was provided, and the high indicated effectiveness also causes doubts due to the lack of IDF transparency. It's clear that Iron Dome is not cost effective. Hamas and Hezbollah rockets cost between $300 and $800. When assessing cost effectiveness, IDF should consider insurance payments for damaged property. Comparing this data for the 3 above-mentioned operations has led experts to conclude that per rocket damage has been reduced from $29,500 in 2006 to $9,000 in 2012 and $5,100 in 2014. However, some U.S. experts doubt the objectivity of official Israeli data and believe that intercept probability is about 5%. According to Michael Anderson, an expert with the Brock University, reduction in rocket effectiveness since the Second Lebanon War was due not only to Iron Dome, but also to a series of other measures, including early warning and bomb shelter improvements. Moreover, Gaza and the Second Lebanon War can hardly be compared, in part because of the differences in population density between southern and northern Israel. Accurate assessments are also made difficult by absence of sufficient verifiably accurate information, much of which remains classified. Israel is continuing Iron Dome purchases. It's also clear Hezbollah, Hamas, and their allies will seek to improve their own offensive weapons to make them more effective at overcoming Iron Dome, with two parallel approaches, tactical and technical. From the technical point of view, the attacker will seek to improve munitions accuracy. If guided artillery shells are used, Iron Dome effectiveness would be much lower. According to IDF Air Defense Commander Zwick Heimovich, Hezbollah and Hamas will be able to strike Israel using cruise missiles. Even when these improved systems are intercepted, they would increase Israel's expenditures on air defenses because more interceptor rockets would be needed. Tactically, the obvious response is placing offensive weapons in direct proximity of targets, given that Iron Dome's minimum effective range is 4 kilometers. Even today, Hezbollah can strike 75% of Israel's territory using systems it currently owns. Iron Dome has only limited abilities to intercept several targets simultaneously. Therefore, Israel's opponents will seek to increase the density of its rocket volleys. Increasing the number of cheap weapons is the most likely course adversaries will adopt. According to some reports, Hezbollah has already increased the number of its rockets by several times, to more than 100,000. Combining unguided and guided rockets would greatly increase the ability to overcome ABM defenses. Moreover, ABM systems would be degraded if faced by multiple adversaries operating from different directions. According to open source data, Iron Dome is quite sensitive and often reacts to false alarms, for example, from machine gun bursts. This vulnerability is an obvious one to exploit. The psychological factor also matters. RAND analysts are correct to note that reducing casualties among Israeli civilians has a negative media effect against the backdrop of losses among Palestinians or Lebanese. In the future, Iron Dome will likely be modernized to address existing problems and to adapt developments in offensive means. Moreover, fire control and radar systems will be modernized as well. On the one hand, the system will be better able to detect launches and predict trajectories. On the other hand, it's necessary to improve the ability to identify targets due to its propensity to react to false alarms. These efforts will be accompanied by the development of Iron Beam, which is intended to defeat ultra-short-range munitions. Israel has limited ability to improve ABM tactics and include better coordination, where intelligence gathering plays a big role. Israel and its adversaries will continue improving their defensive and offensive systems respectively. They will focus on modernization, improving quality and quantity, development of new weapons, and improving tactics. Hezbollah and Hamas will emphasize tactics changes in the use of their existing arsenals, combined with improving their rockets' range and accuracy, and expanding the variety of weapon systems used. Combining cheap and improved precise rockets in a single salvo will become a more frequent tactic. Israel, in turn, will continue perfecting Iron Dome and Iron Beam with U.S. assistance, but given the increased arsenals of its adversaries, Tel Aviv will place greater emphasis on its intelligence and special operations to detect and destroy rocket launchers in early stages of conflict. Israel will also be forced to recognize the importance of traditional civil defense and early warning, since Iron Dome may be forced to focus on defending military targets and critical infrastructure when faced with mass attacks. Here too, intelligence and diplomatic instruments will be used to prevent a coordinated attack by several adversaries. Effectiveness of this system in future conflicts will influence its export potential.
Southfront is a crowd-funded endeavor and operates solely on the basis of donations from its audience. If you want to help Southfront to remain an open source of coverage and analysis of conflict zones and military diplomatic developments around the globe, please support our work.
The Quds Force is the irregular warfare unit of Iran's Corps of Guardians of the Islamic Revolution, created during the Holy Defense to augment the capabilities of the Sepah to include irregular warfare. It has since become one of the chief means of expanding Iranian soft power within the Middle East and throughout the world. Carrying the Persian name for Jerusalem, it is emblematic of the eschatological significance of the Islamic Republic's regional military strategy. More has come to light about this secretive organization since its inception, but precious little of its organization, personnel, weaponry, and operations is known, and comes to light only in the wake of its suspected activities. The close of the Holy Defense in 1988 saw the completion of the first chapter of the history of the Islamic Republic, conventional war. The peace which followed left the new government intact, but the population war-weary. The government needed to turn its attention to rebuilding the infrastructure and bringing orderliness to the disrupted lives of its people. The armed forces, both the Artesh and the Sepah, though rich with battle experience, had been worn down and desperately needed this peace. If this war taught the Iranian leadership anything, the lesson was prevent another conventional attack by pushing the frontier for possible conflict as far as possible from the border. To safeguard the home of the revolution, which Khomeini and his followers viewed and still view as the only legitimate Islamic government, and the one which is meant to prepare the way for the return of the Mahdi, a sizable buffer had to be constructed to allow for its endurance. While Iran had not been defeated in the Holy Defense, it had been severely wounded by Saddam's army with Western backing. At the end of the war, Iran had a shortage in key resources and finance. The war clearly exposed the weaknesses of both the Iranian economy and the armed forces. The Mujtahid rulers needed to create and perfect a national defense based upon self-reliance in order to turn Iran into a fortress for Islam, from which calls for Islamic unity in the face of Zionist and Western imperialist influence could issue. Having survived this baptism of fire intact, and with geopolitics still centered around the bipolar contest between the United States and the Soviet Union, the time for such reconstruction appeared optimal. The Sepah was created immediately after the revolution in order to counter threats from armed opposition groups inside Iran, such as the MKO, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq or People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, and to protect the ideological integrity of the new political system. Originally a paramilitary formation, during the Holy Defense, it necessarily took on a military character while shouldering with the Artesh in the burden of fighting. During the war, in addition to the many conventional battles fought against the Iraqis, the Iranians also deployed special forces to the front line in the mountainous terrain of the north, and behind the lines to support the Kurdish struggle in northern Iraq against Saddam Hussein's regime. To mirror this unit within the Artesh, the Sepah created the Quds Force to engage in all aspects of irregular warfare. Thus, the role of the Quds Force in the establishment of Hezbollah's Islamic resistance, al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, in 1982 during the Lebanese Civil War was inevitable. Following this, it was used to support the operations of the Hezb-e-Wadat Shia Mujahideen in Afghanistan during the Soviet occupation. By supporting Hezbollah and the Hezb-e-Wadat, Iran was able to counter, respectively, the American Zionist coalition and the Soviets, thereby keeping these two groups from threatening the territorial integrity of the Islamic Republic. When Khomeini died in 1989 and was succeeded by Ali Khamenei, who oversaw the transition from a war to a peace economy, Quds was able, along with its parent Sepah, to maintain its level of funding and even to increase its relative importance within the military strategy of Iran. Having discussed the ideological and strategic origins and purposes of the Quds Force, let us look at its structure and methods of warfare. Apart from its three senior commanders, no names can be attributed to either its leadership or the remainder of the force. Major General Pastar Qasem Soleimani, presently the most well-known Iranian soldier, has commanded the Quds Force since 1997, and his two deputies are Brigadier General Pastar Ismail Khani and Brigadier General Pastar Ahmad Saburi. Because all members of Quds are taken from the larger Sepah, one can presume that it retains the same rank structure as its parent, although it is impossible to verify or deny this. Similarly, although the size of the Quds Force can be approximated, its small-level tactical organization can only be guessed at based upon the arrangement of other comparable military units. As indicated previously, Quds has two missions: advising and training of foreign military and police, and clandestine operations. Teams of men for either type of mission may be formed ad hoc out of the service pools of each of the 8 directorates suspected to exist. According to the United States Joint Chiefs of Staff, Quds is divided into the following 8 directorates: Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, Yemen, Persian Gulf, Israel, Lebanon, Jordan, Middle East, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Turkey, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, former Soviet Union, Central and Western Europe, and the United States and Canada. Further, U.S. military intelligence suggests that Quds is divided into several branches of specialization: intelligence, finance, politics, sabotage, special operations. Because, however, its operations are unconventional, there is no reason to think that the Quds Force has an organization remarkably different from other secret services. For its clandestine operations, something approaching a commando team of varying size, anywhere from 5 to 15 men led by 1 or 2 officers, seems reasonable. Also, there could be organic permanent units of Quds assigned to each directorate, each with a different operational specialty, and these would invariably be combined arms units, but with the component men varying depending upon what needs to be accomplished. For the advisory and training missions, arguably what constitutes the greatest percentage of Quds assignments, one can imagine an officer NCO structure corresponding to the level of the ranks needing training. For example, so many officers of such a rank to train their peers or lower-ranking officers, and likewise so many NCOs to train their peers or enlisted men. As a side note, it has been suggested that Quds trains most of its clients in either the Sudan or in Iran itself. For all of these missions, the officer-NCO ratio is necessarily higher than in the rest of the Sepah. For this reason, it can be argued that officers and NCOs comprise a large majority of the Quds Force personnel, seeing that enlisted men would not be used to train or advise their superiors. Where does the Quds Force carry out its clandestine operations? From reasonable conjecture regarding the structure, the reach of Quds is worldwide. It has been suspected of involvement in South America, for example in supporting the government of Venezuela, of continuing to intervene in Afghanistan against the American presence, of constituting a permanent training and advisory role to the Islamic resistance of Hezbollah, of supporting the Syrian government since the conflict of 2011, and most of all of involvement in Iraq since 2003. Since 2008, the Quds Force has been given control of all military operations in Iraq, and it formed and currently oversees the 3 primary Shiite paramilitary organizations which work in conjunction with the Iraqi military: Asa'ib al-Haq, League of the Righteous, with 10,000 members; Kata'ib Hizb Allah, Brigades of the Party of God, with 30,000 plus members; and the Saraya al-Salam, peace companies, with anywhere from 10,000 to 50,000 members. This theatre of operations, provided indirectly to Quds by the Americans, gives the most continual experience to its members through the training and directing of these militias. In the recent theatre of the Persian Gulf, the recent attacks against oil tankers bear the mark of what Quds is capable of, but the Iranian government has consistently denied responsibility. Conversely, American and Israeli special forces possess the capability to carry out such false flag attacks, and their histories give plenty of examples. Currently, the most important missions which Quds directly or in which it participates are missile shipments to Hezbollah, arming and directing of Shiite militias in Iraq, support of Syrian government, support of Houthis. As to types of weapons, the Quds Force probably uses the same species as other special forces. For example, the United States Green Berets, Russian Spetsnaz, British SAS, that is, handguns, for example the PC-9 ZOAF, submachine guns, for example MPT-9, KL 7.62, heavy machine guns, e.g. MGA-3, portable manpads, e.g. Sohail, rocket-propelled grenade launcher, for example RAD or PG-29, anti-tank weapons, for example the Sege 1 or 2, portable mortars, for example the 37mm Marsh mortar, plastic explosives, for example C4, Semtex. The use of heavy equipment does not correspond to its missions. In terms of size, the active personnel of Quds has been estimated to be anywhere from 5,000 to 20,000, although the most common number given is 15,000. GlobalSecurity.org asserts that in 2008, the Iranian Supreme National Security Council authorized an increase in the size of the group to 15,000, but this cannot be presently confirmed. By comparison, the Russian Spetsnaz has a strength of roughly 5,000, the United States Green Berets 7,000, the British SAS 400 to 600. Moving to consider its place in the Iranian political ideology of 12 Shi'ism, Quds Force bears great eschatological significance. A fact which receives barely any coverage in the Western press, the founding of the Islamic Republic was clearly stated by Ayatollah Khomeini to coincide with the approach of the end of the world. As Twelver Shias, Khomeini and his successors are convinced that the maintenance of Velayat-e-Faqih is critical to the return of the 12th Imam, Muhammad al-Mahdi. The eschatology of the Jafari school of jurisprudence, the official legal teaching in Iran, named after the 6th Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, names Jerusalem as central to the return of the Mahdi and to the establishment of Islamic government throughout the world, i.e. the golden age of Islamic rule as promised by the Prophet Muhammad. According to Sunni and Shia prophecies, the army foreordained to conquer Jerusalem is to be comprised of mostly people from the region of Iran, with Iranians having a great and important role in the event. Thus, the naming of the Special Operations subset of the Sepah after the Persian name for the holy city of Jerusalem should show the rest of the world just how important to the Iranians is the maintenance of their system of government by all means possible. Currently, the use of Quds to engage in asymmetrical warfare against the American-Israeli alliance is the best means to ensure this end. Presently, Quds can be seen as forming a shield forward for the Islamic Republic from a strategic point of view. This gives eschatological importance to their continued support of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and to their great commitment in men and material to ensure the continuance of the Syrian government. They believe that when the Imam Mahdi returns, Zionism, which Shia regard as one of the main tools in the struggle between good and evil, will be defeated in the final great battle for Jerusalem. Therefore, they are approaching as close as possible to Israel, serving at the front line. They have succeeded in giving Iran a reasonable amount of protection, if at the expense of their allies who are physically closer to Israel. The American Navy remains a threat to the Persian Gulf, but with the wider Sepah, to whose vigilance this theatre is committed, are confident they can close the Strait of Hormuz if necessary. The strategic balance is currently in favor of Iran, and they have thus fulfilled what they believe to be their role in preparing for the Mahdi's return. For those who believe in the eschatological purpose of the Islamic Republic, The Quds Force is unquestionably the vanguard of the coming march on Jerusalem, and the Western press ignores this to their own peril and the continued ignorance of their audiences. From military and political standpoints, Quds has been very effective. Iranian strategy has, since the 1979 revolution, been to keep the American-Israeli alliance and its proxies at bay. As stated previously, due to Iran's inability to wage a full-scale war against both countries, the use of unconventional warfare has made the Quds Force come into prominence with Iran's national defensive strategy. Through both its advisory and training roles and its clandestine operations, Quds is used to prevent Iran's two chief enemies from realizing strategic objectives in the Middle East and Persian Gulf, and to make their continued presence within Iran's immediate zone of security as costly and unpleasant as possible.